Hi everybody, Richard Tromans here again from Artificial Lawyer TV. Today we're looking at Nakoda and their work with ISDA, the derivatives standard setting organization. Nakoda is a special part, of Linklaters. It's a tech team in effect working on very structured contracts. To help explain the work that they've been doing and the work they've been doing with ISDA, we have Megan O'Flynn, who is the General Counsel of ISDA. Hi Megan.
Hi.
Good to have you on the show. And we have Deepak Sitlani, who is part of Nakoda. Hi, Deepak.
Hello.
Alrighty, so let's get into this. First of all, if you could just explain, I think let's start off with Deepak with Nakoda. What is Nakoda for people who don't know what it is? And it's been around for a few years. There's been a few changes. Where are you now, and what's your role?
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. So first of all, my name is Deepak Sitlani. So I'm a partner in the derivatives team at Linklaters. So I am a lawyer, and it's important to bring that out because Nakoda is the firm's in-house tech team, which is staffed with both lawyers, but also a good number of non-lawyers. And so I think it's important to bring that out because we feel within the Nakoda team that there is a real need for legal tech to be delivered by a combination of lawyers and tech folks. And my role, I wear a couple of hats. So one is our version of our board is the Nakoda Steering Committee, and so I'm on that. And also I'm the relationship partner for ISDA, with whom we've collaborated on ISDA Create, which we'll no doubt talk about.
Awesome. So just to be a bit more specific, so the Nakoda doesn't just do legal tech in general across all areas. You have a certain focus. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely right, actually. So one of the things that we within the firm do we are very kind of clear that we look to both build and use various forms of legal tech. So that may not be tech that we have built, but what Nakoda looks after in particular is the technology that we as a firm have built. And so in that respect, the real focus is the document automation and negotiation platform that the team has built.
Awesome. Thanks, Deepak. So now, Megan, ISDA, very well known to people in the finance world, but again, artificial lawyers audience quite broad. For people who don't know what derivatives and ISDA actually does, could you just give us a bit of an intro? And then secondly, how come you got to work with Nakoda?
Sure. So my name is Megan O'Flynn. I'm an assistant general counsel here at ISDA. ISDA stands for the International Swaps and Derivatives Association. You may have, if you are familiar at all with finances, heard people say, we're gonna enter into an ISDA, and ISDA, right, as a term. That refers to generally ISDA's main master agreement contract, which standardizes the terms, or many of the terms, for certain derivatives contracts. Those types of standardized contracts make up a great significant majority of derivatives contracts outstanding today. And we've been around for 30 plus years, creating standards that help make the market safer and more efficient. With respect to Create in particular, and sort of where we came to that, following Dodd-Frank and the advent of greater regulation around derivatives worldwide, in particular with respect to the requirements for margin to be transferred between parties on each transaction. There have been regulations that have been coming into force that have really put pressure on the industry to paper a lot of their negotiations around their documentation for margin and for other relationship documentation on a very expedited basis. And so ISDA got feedback from our members several years ago. Look, these regulations are coming into force. It's going to be a huge lift for the industry, and we don't want to gum up the works of being able to engage in transactions. How do we do that in a way that's safe and a way that's efficient, and a way that makes sure that we have fidelity of information so that we have it between counterparties and when we're reporting to our regulators worldwide? So one of the tools that ISDA came up with in conjunction with Linklaters Nakoda was to put some of those documents, those relationship documents, in particular, starting with the ones that have to do with regulatory compliance, onto the ISDA Create platform. And that really creates an efficiency of scale in communicating with your counterparties and getting these documents in place so that you don't have interruption in your transactions.
Got you. So just on a sort of more sort of layman's terms, so ISDA Create effectively is a document automation platform that Linklaters helped you to create and populate and get legally correct. Is that approximately?
So essentially, I can start and Deepak can chip in, but essentially, ISDA typically with its members creates standardized documentation, right? So we go with the entire industry and say, how do we solve these, in this case, regulatory, sort of requirements that are being put upon the industry on both sides of the market? That's been ISDA's traditional role. So we create these documents, we put them forth to the industry, and traditionally they're then executed on a bilateral basis, right? So each counterparty goes out to all their other counterparties and says, look, there's these regulatory requirements. I need this information from you. We need to make this agreement. The difference now is that ISDA Create allows us to take those documents that are standardized and created with industry input and put them onto a digital platform. And then each party is able to say, okay, what's my starting position, right? Let me send out my starting position to all my counterparties. And then they compare their starting position that they have embedded in their system. And all of a sudden, we're already at step 7 instead of step 1, right? I don't have to send an email to each individual. I know exactly who the person is because they're on the platform. And we can start the process and make things move at light speed as opposed to trudging along to try to get these things done.
Got you. Thank you. So it's a kind of collaborative space as well. So Deepak, can you just maybe just like touch on some of the tech aspects here? So what did Nakoda bring to the party in terms, particularly in terms of the tech?
Yeah, sure. So as Megan says, you start off with a standardized document, which is really important actually. And so then the first thing that we did was to basically think about the problem we're trying to solve for, and the problem is trying to negotiate a huge number of similar contracts in a short space of time. So that brings with it a few elements actually. So the first one is just automated production of documents, which I think is relatively old hat, to be honest. But actually not everyone was doing that on a consistent basis. So the first thing we did was build functionality that allows for the automatic creation of a contract. And the way it's done is quite clever. And I think at some point we should definitely show you how it works, because basically you have on screen a number of elections that need to be filled in. And as you're filling them in, you then see on the right hand side of the screen the document populate. So once you have a populated document, that is just the first step, because in the normal world you then have to negotiate that contract, which as Megan says can be a slightly painful process. So the next thing that we ask ourselves is there a way to streamline the negotiation process? And so there are multiple ways in which you can streamline that process. So one of which is to actually take that single contract or that automated document and send it out to multiple people in one go. So that avoids, as Megan says, the thousands of emails. You can do it relatively quickly in one go. So that's helpful. That's a time saver. The next one is, well, what happens if your counterparty responds to you and says, well, that's a very nice contract, but actually I disagree with X, Y, Z provisions in it. So in the kind of traditional paper world, you will have someone literally marking up that contract either with a pen or typing comments in. So here it's done on the platform, which means that those comments are firstly stored, and secondly they can be fed internally to other people. Why is that important? A number of large institutions, no single person is able to make a decision for every input into a contract. So invariably there's a process whereby you need to get sign off or input from various people. And actually one of the pieces that's important is tracking who needs to sign off on what and what they have said. So what you now get within the platform is an automatic log of the approvals process that a firm has gone through. So that's helpful. You've got it all in one pack. And what you're also doing as you kind of progress through that negotiation is that you are capturing the data that underpins the contract. So we knew that it would be very important to capture as much data as possible, and so that data includes all of the elections, all of the approvals, and so the next bit was being able to translate that data or convert that data in a way that would be helpful to firms. So we've done that in a couple of ways. So one is that we can capture the data in a JSON format, and then that allows people to download the data in Excel. And then the other thing that we've done is we've helped firms build APIs so that they take the data directly from ISDA Create and straight into their systems. And to give you a real example, when we were doing this type of contract in the paper world, when firms had finished their negotiations, they said that they would run a 48-hour 4i process to convert the data. And so now you've got an instantaneous 100% accurate capture of the data, which means that you are able to trade instantaneously. So I think that is bringing real value to market participants.
Awesome, fantastic. And I particularly like the fact that it's a kind of holistic platform right from the beginning all down to the end of getting kind of a, you didn't mention a dashboard, but I imagine you could take that data and bring it out into a dashboard.
There is a dashboard. I should have mentioned a dashboard. You're right to pick me up on it. So there is one, and it captures all sorts of pieces, to be honest, and you can interact with it in multiple ways. So for example, on the negotiation side, you can get an overview as to in whose court the negotiation is. You, as a manager of a team, you can get an overview as to how many contracts your individual team members are negotiating. And then you can also kind of manipulate the data in a way which is use a dashboard to understand what particular provisions are in what contract. So and that's a constantly evolving piece, actually, because people want more and more information to appear on that dashboard.
So could for example, I mean, this follows a story I was told about when McKinsey went into the big investment banks in New York during the financial crisis of 2008. One of the GCs was asked if they knew what was in all their derivatives, and they said, I haven't got a clue, and it would be so expensive to find out. This bank will be dead by the time we find out. At that point, that actually led to the creation of a legal tech company to try and solve that problem. But it reminds me, maybe Megan can answer this as well. I mean, could an investment bank use Nakoda and ISDA Create and basically get a true picture of all of its outstanding obligations and money coming in, money coming out, and so forth, to put it very simply?
So I'm happy to kick off. Yes, is the short answer. So capturing data at source means that you can access it instantaneously, and so that's one of the real drivers. And so that some of the lawyers like the automated contracts, but the real value, frankly, is in that 100% capture of data. So if you fast forward however many years, I think the poor folk who have to do due diligence of contracts, they might have to do other things because all of the data will be there.
Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. So just Megan, just to get a comment from you, because obviously you're part of the industry itself. I mean, how useful is this?
I think it's incredibly useful. I mean, to your point about sort of knowing what's in your contracts, one thing I always like to think about is when you go through this process, and again, sort of the way ISDA Create started, although we're sort of expanding as we go along, was with respect to regulatory documents. Now, let's say you execute, 10,000 contracts, right, in the next however many years that you're doing this with your counterparties. And then a regulator comes along in whatever jurisdiction it is and says, oh wait, we need to make a tweak. You now need to have this other language in all your contracts, right? Which will happen.
Yeah.
Now, in the old world, right, and in the world you're talking about during the financial crisis, you have to actually have people, right, whether it's a consulting firm or internal folks, go through every single document you have, even if they've input it into a system, right, manually, and figure out what those things are, reach out to every single counterparty and say, we have this new regulatory requirement, what should we do? We have to renegotiate this contract. In the Easier Create platform, when and if that happens with a particular counterparty, you can go in and say, show me all my contracts in X jurisdiction with X type of counterparty that I know needs to make a change, and send out this common standardized, proposed amendment. And then the counterparty, you may have a one-time back and forth, but they're aware through the system, this is the change we need to make. They agree to it, and now you have an amended and restated contract that you've both agreed to. I mean, that level of nimbleness, I think, will really be beneficial for parties in, sort of the long term, in addition to the obvious sort of, efficiency savings that Deepak was talking about, and having nimbleness within your actual contracts for your day-to-day transactions. So I really do think it's a really super valuable piece. And I think one thing to keep in mind is that derivatives in particular are really, in my mind, fertile space for this kind of innovation, and innovation in the areas of smart contracts and DLT technology, which ISDA does focus on and work with our members on as well. And in part, that's because we have had standardized transaction agreements for 30 plus years, right? We do have a starting basis where everyone on certain terms is agreed and understood. As the lawyer in the room with Deepak, I do want to point out that ISDA has never put out standardized contracts that prevent counterparties from customizing when they want, right? So, the ISDA Create platform has as many, flexible sort of off-ramp points as are needed, open text box, those sorts of things. Those things are captured as data, and so they are still in the system. And obviously, we encourage standardization, between parties where they can get to a common understanding and a common business outcome. And we can talk a little bit about how we support that as well. But, there always is this opportunity for customization and sort of additions where needed. So that's something that we are aware of and we know isn't a necessity, but there are pieces of the puzzle that can be automated, can be captured, and to make things easier going forward for sure.
Interesting. Well, that brings us to the topic of the use of NLP, natural language processing systems, document AI, legal AI, whatever you want to call it, systems which can read the text, extract key clauses and extract key dates and values and so forth, and present it that way, which is used after the fact, as opposed to capturing the data at the point of creation and then having some form of tabulated system to show you what is there. I mean, there's a sort of natural tension there, isn't there? And it was interesting that you talked about the way that you can go off-ramp and start adding customized text. I mean, perhaps it's not as simple as, it's either this or it's this. I mean, is the answer a bit of both, that you probably need Nakoda's superstructured, dashboard, and also occasionally you'll need to bring in an NLP system. If Goldman Sachs, for example, happens to say, oh, by the way, these 25,000 contracts, well, actually, we've been playing with these and they're completely not regular any longer. This isn't going to work. You're going to have to bring in some other technology. I mean, what's the right balance there?
Yeah, so kind of looking big picture, a couple years ago, 2017 actually, ISDA and Linklaters co-authored a paper on smart contracts and derivatives, right? And one, regardless of if they were created on ISDA Create or outside the system. And one thing we really honed in on was this concept of operative and non-operative provisions, where your operative provisions, which are things like a certain payout happens on a certain date based on a certain type of outcome, can be automated, right? There are other things like, was there an event of default, that we don't think will ever be automated because people will need to make that sort of decision at the time. So I think one thing we have in mind is that there always are going to be pieces of a contract that are going to be more subject to automation and less subject to automation. both practically and at the desire of the parties, right, to have subjectivity put into the negotiation process and the outcome process when a transaction takes place. With respect to sort of looking at contracts through natural language processing or AI, things that have already been done, not captured at the beginning, there are a couple ways that ISDA looks at that. And I think Linklaters Nakota has been instrumental in helping us think through this as well. A couple years ago, we started looking at our master agreement, that contract I told you about that's been outstanding for 30 plus years. That contract has many standard provisions that aren't really controversial, but there are many provisions that are commonly negotiated in those transactions and in those agreements that are relationship documents that set the stage for the transactions that come underneath them. And we worked with our members for a couple of years on a clause library and taxonomy of standardized clauses. So what that means is that with respect to the master agreement in particular, which is a huge part of the derivatives market overall, we have standard drafting options for frequently negotiated provisions. So that means, in a very simple way, if you and I are trading in a contract and we are looking at, for example, the termination currency that we want to use for our contract, and you as lawyer at counterparty A say, I want the contract to say the termination currency is U period S period $. And I come back and I say, I think it should be U period S period D dollars. Why are we saying different things when we want the same business outcome, right? That's obviously a very simplistic example, but the idea is that can we get to, for these commonly negotiated provisions, a set of common business outcomes, and how do we want to establish those? So that's one way in which ISDA is trying to narrow the universe of sort of applicable possible outcomes that a natural language processing system or an AI system might be able to link up with, and help us look at our historical contracts, right? Help counterparties look at those. And so that technology is both useful for sort of a backward looking, or something like looking at your current contracts, as well as we are building that technology into putting our master agreement onto the ISDA Create platform, so that going forward, parties will also have that option to utilize those standard drafting provisions when they have a common business outcome. So that's just one or two ways in which ISDA is really trying to think critically about how we can further help parties narrow those things. We know that the natural language processing and AI technologies are coming, but they're not quite there yet with respect to how we think they need to function in order to really have fidelity between what we know is in the contract without a human eye looking at it. And so as those things come along, we're hoping that these types of tools and technologies that we're helping to create along with Linklaters Nakota and the industry will really help hone that process even more and make it easier.
Gotcha. So, I mean, fundamentally, I think to boil it down, I think what you're saying is that the NLP tools at the moment need to be 100% accurate. And if you're not going to have a whole team of lawyers checking everything, then you're going to have to stick to a rules-based structured system.
Yeah, I mean, and Deepak, please weigh in. I think that NLP and AI technology in this space is coming really far. But the reality is, when it comes to either regulatory obligations, right, you have to tell the regulator the truth and exactly what you know to be the truth, and it has to be right, or you'll get in trouble potentially. Or, it's down to, we have to have certainty as to how much margin we have to hold. We have to have certainty as to when the event of default might take place, right? Those things that are legal terms that have impact potentially on your bottom line, it's also very important that you have 100% accuracy. So I think that technology is coming and it is developing. But at this point, we think that these tools are very helpful in helping create that really true fidelity in these transactions.
Gotcha. Deepak, any additional comments on the use of NLP tools?
Yeah, just a little bit. So I think you're right. Particularly now, I think you will see a need for NLP tools. But I think what's interesting is how technology is now driving the legal work, so that we in the future will less and less need those kind of tools. So but to give you an example, Megan mentioned the clause library project, and I do think that so much of that was driven by technology, actually. So the fact that technologically it would be great to have buckets of standardized provisions so that we could capture those provisions as structured data, was a good influencer in having that project. Similarly, when we as lawyers draft documents to put onto a platform, we now have in mind how much structured data we can capture so that we try and maximize that data, and we draft contracts differently now in order to be able to do, I think, move on from the world where you just draft your contracts in any old way and you try and wait for the NLP technology to kind of catch up as and when you do need to due diligence. So I think give it time, we hopefully won't need it.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're coming to the end, so just two very quick questions. And obviously there's probably some detail that you can't give me here, but just curious, because I always ask a lot of tech companies this. I mean, how does this work as a business model? Presumably there is some kind of, is this like a contra deal, and you guys do this, and then all the billable work is coming to Linklaters around more complex matters, or I mean, how does this work?
That's a good question, and as you can imagine, we might be a little bit coy in how we answer it. But I think the one thing I would say is that this is an offering from Linklaters and Dakoda, so the technology offering, and it is distinct from the legal work that we do for ISDA. But what is interesting is the extent of the the crossover that we have between teams.
So Megan, this is a kind of what they call a value added thing, and you pay later for the more complex work, or how does that work?
I mean, we work with Linklaters on a number of other projects that I think feed into this and tie into it. So they've worked with us on pieces of the Clause Library project. They worked to help us develop the initial margin documentation that I said was the sort of first piece of the puzzle in ISDA Create. So there are sort of ties in that way. As far as the ISDA Create platform itself, it's a venture that's offered to the industry, and we have a collaborative team that helps us offer that, both lawyers and non-lawyers on both sides of the coin. So, it is really a strong collaboration, I think, between the two of us. Well, three of us, I guess, if Dakoda is the sort of third part of Linklaters internally. But we have a team within ISDA and a team within Linklaters and Linklaters Dakoda particularly that really, constantly is working together to try to make sure we're delivering something to the industry that's going to be actually really valuable for them.
Gotcha. I think you answered the question, but we'll have to leave it there. Just very briefly, and this is probably the subject of a whole other chat. Smart contracts in the sort of traditional sense of a self-executing document that has coded elements that it just runs itself. It goes bing, it's the 25th of November. I'm going to pay you out because the gold price has dropped to this point. Bing. Do you think that's the way to go, or is that just way too dangerous?
So I can start, and Deepak can weigh in. ISDA thinks that there are many opportunities for smart contracts to really play a key role. We have a series of white papers that look at smart contract technology, not only generally for derivatives, but with respect to specific products. So for equities, CDS, interest rate, and soon to come FX, each of those products, which are major in the derivatives industry, where are the specific opportunities for those products where the smart contract technology really can play a role. But obviously those are very complicated markets, very complicated issues. And there are extant technologies now that any new smart contract technology would have to take into account, right? So, there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle. But again, I think because there are so many standardizations that have been in place in the industry overall for so many years, derivatives are really a place where that smart contract and DLT technology, I think, has a lot of fertile ground to start with. You don't have to build from zero. You're already sort of on, the 30th yard line and going forward. So you really can, hit the ground running if you're a technology developer in this space. And we have a number of members of ISDA who are technology developers and vendors in the smart contract and DLT space that I think have found a lot of value in the work that ISDA does because we do have that standardization. We also have we maintain a CDM, a common domain model that allows, it's an open source language that allows you to build contract language from beginning to end and transaction data using that common language and speaks between different types of computer languages. So I'm a lawyer, I'm not an expert on that, but we have that as part of our puzzle as well, that hopefully we think, as being offered as an open source piece of technology and maintained by ISDA on behalf of the industry with industry input, will help foster those type of technologies for derivatives.
Right. So just reading between the lines, it hasn't started yet, but you're kind of inching towards it.
I think it has started in certain aspects. So particularly with respect to, I think collateral is one area where collateral transfers, there's been a ton of, improvement in the type of smart contract technology that's been there. It's on the margins in terms of like, is it a fully automated contract? No, I don't think that any sort of legal contract that involves any sort of discretion, so that's every legal contract, will ever be fully smart contract ready, and not have release valves, right? Not have places where each party is going to want some discretion, particularly in the case of derivatives where there is not in any given moment, one party may be in the money, one party may be out of the money. When you sign that contract, you don't know where you're going to sit when some event may happen, right? Or may potentially happen. So in that sense, there is really two sides of the coin, not one party that has all the power, in that sense of the word. So it is really an area where I think there's a good opportunity for there to be really bilateral consensus on what pieces of the puzzle should be automated and both parties can be in agreement, and what pieces should have off ramps. I don't know, Deepak, if you have other thoughts on that.
I was and this will be the last comment. I mean, just to sum up, it sounds to me like automated payouts, sometimes in the millions of dollars, is probably not the way we're going to go, but there could be other elements that are automated.
I don't know. I think we will go down the road of automated payouts, actually. I think that was certainly what I was taking away from what Megan was saying, which is there are some parts of a contract that are definitely capable of being automated. In fact, we're drafting some documentation with ISDA with that in mind, actually. So in the context of interest rates, for example, you should be able to get to a position that once you source an interest rate and you know what amount you're applying that interest rate to, actually it should be able to calculate the payment, make the payment on a relatively automated basis. I agree with Megan that you need the safety valve. So if one of the parties defaults, then you need human intervention to stop things happening or exercise discretion. But no, definitely I think we will get to a point where we will have, I guess, parts of contracts that are self-executing.
Awesome. Well, look, thank you very much, Megan. Thanks very much, Deepak. Very interesting. And I think we've touched on so many other points that we could explore. But we'll leave it there and look forward to speaking to you again.
Likewise. Thanks for your time. Take care.